Hi, welcome to Historic Eats, where we recreate recipes from the past. Well, it is the very end of September, and here in Ohio, the apples are in. So today's Historic Eat is deep fried apple hand pies. Well, in researching historic recipes, one of the things I've noticed is the recurring theme of portability. Without cars, it was a journey to get from one place to another. So, food typically had to be serving sized portions. It had to be something you could eat with your hands. It had to last a day or two. And something like a hand pie just fit the bill perfectly. So, the colonists were very familiar with pies, especially hand pies. But the deep fried hand pie, now that, my friends, is the genius work of the American South. And in going through some of these old Southern recipes for fried pies, very often they suggest using dried fruit. And this was for two reasons. One, dried fruit just works better in the pie because you want to keep the moisture content low. Since you're eating with your hands, you don't want it to be soggy and the crust breaking. And secondly, dehydrated fruit was a way of preserving the fruit. And so that was something they would have had on hand year round. So dried fruit was something that was accessible and they could make those pies at any time of the year. But since it is apple season, I want to use my apples right off the tree. So I have to do one extra step, and that means we just have to cook them down for a little bit just to reduce the moisture content. So our first step is preparing the apples. So I'm using Honeycrisp apples, but you could use whatever apple varieties you like. Macintosh, Granny Smith are also delicious. And I'm just using my apple peeler to get the skin off. And we're going to use 5 average size apples today. So over here at the stove, I just barely covered them with water. I have about an inch of water in the pan and I have them on medium heat. I'm just going to begin cooking them and letting them reduce. The apples have been boiling for about 30 minutes and you can see there's just very little water left in the pan, so we're really getting close now. I'm going to be adding the sugar and the cornstarch here shortly. I'm just going to turn it down and start working on the dough, but as you can see, the apples still have structure to them. It hasn't turned into like applesauce. You just want them to be really tender like they would be in a pie and have almost all of the water cooked away. To begin my crust, I'm going to start with 3 cups of all-purpose flour. To that, I'm adding a half a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, I'm just going to sift together those dry ingredients. Now I'm going to cut in 1½ sticks of butter, which is 3/4 cup of softened butter. Now once that's broken up, it's like little consistent size, pea-sized pebbles, I'll start adding the water and the egg. This is 1 large egg and 1/4 cup of ice water. And you just go by feel. If it's holding together, then you know you're in good shape. I can tell that this is still too powdery, so I'm going to add a couple more tablespoons of ice water until I can get it to hold together. And then once it holds together, then I'm going to just pop it in the fridge briefly and we'll get ready to roll it out. Okay, so I took the apples off the stove. As you can see, they've cooked down really nicely. There's really no running puddles, but it's still kind of chunky. I'm going to pour it in my mixing bowl, and we'll add the sugar and the spices. So I'm going to begin with 1 cup of brown sugar, a half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg,
I have the juice of half of a lemon. This is roughly 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and to that I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of cornstarch.
and I'm just going to stir it to dissolve the cornstarch in the lemon juice. Put that in there. And I'm just going to stir to combine. Now this has to chill before I can put it on the pastry. So I'm just going to spread it out like in a shallow dish and put it in the refrigerator so it cools fast. And we will get our dough ready and we can start filling them up. The apple filling has cooled down. I measured it. I had a total of 3 cups of the apples once they were done being cooked. And I put the dough in the refrigerator so the dough has chilled and it's ready to be rolled out. I'm going to cut it in half just to make it a more manageable size. I expect to get at least 6 circles out of each half. I probably will end up getting more than that. This cutter is actually a 5-inch cutter, and I'm using a little pierogi press. I got this on Amazon. It works great, but I'll also show you how to do it by just folding it over and crimping it with a fork too. In each of these circles, just going to put it in my little pierogi press. I need 2 tablespoons of the apple mixture. Just with a wet towel, I'm just going to put some water around the edge and press it. Extra tears off. And it's ready to go in the oil. And alternately, you definitely can do it without the press. You can just do it by hand. You just fold it over. And with a fork, you just press the edges. And these are ready to go. Okay, our oil is hot and ready. It needs to be 375 degrees, and I just tested it. This will begin dropping these in. And they only need to be in there for about 5 minutes. You can see inside, they're just flaky. That looks so good. Okay, it's been about 3 minutes and these are just perfectly golden. Okay, everything is done in the fryer, so we're going to just make our glaze. We have a half cup of confectioner's sugar. To that, add a tablespoon of milk and a half teaspoon of vanilla extract. And this is just going to make a glaze that we can just drizzle over them. You could also just sprinkle them with some cinnamon sugar.
In the very early 1600s, English colonists began settling in America, but there was one surprisingly absent ingredient from the land. There were no apples, only wild crab apples, and they were small and tart. The colonists relied heavily on apples, in particular for their juice, as it was a clean source for hydration. In fact, cider was more popular than beer, wine, and bourbon. In addition, apples kept well, and they could be fermented, and the juice could be preserved as vinegar. So no time was wasted, as calls for apples were sent to England, and right away apple seeds and saplings were sent to the American shore. However, it wasn't that simple. The apple trees performed poorly at first. Then it was discovered that there were no honeybees to pollinate the apple blossoms. Again, supplies were called for from England, and the first honeybees arrived on American soil in 1622. The apple trees began flourishing, and orchards were planted wherever the colonists settled. The very first variety of apple cultivated in America was the Roxbury russet of Massachusetts Bay Colony. It had yellow, dull, textured skin, and it kept well. Matter of fact, Thomas Jefferson planted Roxbury russets in Monticello's South Orchard in 1776. Now that America had the key ingredient, on to the star of the show, the deep-fried apple hand pie. Many immigrants settled heavily in Appalachia. The soil was fertile and there was plenty of work in the mines and fields. Hand pies were an ideal meal, as it was necessary for food to be portable for working conditions and traveling. The cultural spectrum of Appalachia was Scottish, Irish, English, German, and African American, and along with them came their varied cooking traditions. Birdies, pasties, and meat pies were all a part of their recipe repertoires for handhelds. The warm climate of southern Appalachia made for an abundant fruit crop, along with expanding apple orchards. In no time, the hand pie was filled with fruit, and a star was born. The magic technique of deep frying took it to a whole new level. Dried fruit was commonly used in hand pies because it was available year-round, and fresh fruit was used while in season. The hand pies were either deep-fried or skillet-fried for a toasty outside and then sugar-coated or glazed. They were popular single-serving desserts at home and at the market, fairs, and festivals. Their popularity was lasting, too. Nearly 200 years after their inception, McDonald's added their own version to the menu in 1968. Today, fried apple hand pies are nostalgia deliciously served up at Southern kitchens, fairs, bake sales, and even your own kitchen. And now on to enjoy the historic deep-fried apple hand pie.
Well, thank you for joining me in making this historic Southern classic. Don't forget to hit subscribe below. I have a lot more recipes that I'd love to share with you. Until next time, bye-bye.